of April in Australia and New Zealand is a very significant day. It's Anzac Day, and it's the day we celebrate our soldiers, our boys, fighting for us in Gallipoli. Now, there are lots of traditions with this day, and I'm not going to go into all of them here in this show, but what I am going to do is show you how to make a very traditional cookie that we call the Anzac Biscuit. Now, it's not just a cookie that we reserve for this particular day of the year. In fact, you'll probably find it in a lot of households in Australia. And if you are to visit somebody in Australia on Anzac Day or any time of the year and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, there's a very good chance that they'll bring out the Anzac Biscuits. And if you are Australian and you go to someone's house, there's a very good chance you'll choose an Anzac Biscuit above all others. They're very easy to make. They're a traditional recipe that we've developed over the years that were originally a Scottish oat cake biscuit. And they're quite significant in the ingredients because they were made by the women in Australia and they were shipped to the boys in Gallipoli. Now, that shipping took quite some time, up to 2 months to get there. So the biscuits had to last the distance. And so they were made specifically with very special ingredients that enabled them to do that. And the one significant thing that you will find with this particular recipe is the omission of eggs. And the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, because our farmers who were producing the eggs were actually already fighting, so they weren't here to do that. But secondly, the other reason is that eggs would deteriorate and the biscuits might go off by the time they got to the boys. So we use golden syrup instead, and golden syrup is used to bind the ingredients together, but it also gives an amazing flavour and texture to the biscuit. Now, my recipe is a little variation on the original recipe because I add extra golden syrup to mine, and also sometimes I'll toast my oats so that they become really crunchy. So it depends on the type of biscuit that you like. When I make them for my father, who absolutely adores these biscuits, I make them chewy. But when I make them for my cousin, who loves them as well, he likes them really, really hard. So I make those crispy, and what I do is I toast the oats. So there are lots of different variations, but the flavour is divine. And honestly, I can't imagine not ever having them in my cookie jar. In fact, when people come to visit me, the first thing they say, can we have a coffee or a cup of tea and maybe an Anzac biscuit? And the answer, of course, is always yes. So let me show you how simple and easy it is to make. Let's look at the ingredients first. It really is just a mixture of coconut, rolled oats, plain flour, bicarb soda, sugar, golden syrup and butter. Now, there's a lot of butter in this recipe, and the butter is used to bind the ingredients as well, along with the golden syrup. You can actually use less butter if you like. It won't affect the recipe too much. In fact, it's quite a moist mixture, and I'm going to advise you, once you've made the biscuits, to actually put the mixture into the fridge for about 30 minutes to firm up the butter again, and it'll make it a lot easier to roll and a lot less messy on your hands, and it won't affect the actual flavour at all. But if you want to use slightly less butter, you can do that and you will still get a really good effect. So literally all we do is we put the dry ingredients, except for the bicarb soda, into a bowl. Then we need to melt our butter and golden syrup. So let's go over to the cooktop to do that. Just add all of the butter at once and the golden syrup on top, and turn it on to low and allow it to melt together. Now, I've added, the traditional recipe for this is in fact 1 tablespoon of golden syrup, but I put 2 in, and there are some times when I even add more because it really does change the flavour quite dramatically. Make sure their temperature is quite low. We want them to melt together gradually. So now what we want to do is mix these ingredients so that they're ready. Just make sure that they're all thoroughly mixed together using a wooden spoon or a metal spoon. Now you can periodically stir and move the butter and golden syrup together so that they combine while they're melting. So while we're waiting for that to happen, we can get our tray ready. Now, what I tend to do with this, because there's so much butter in this recipe, you really don't need to grease the tray. All I use is a flat tray. You can see mine's got lots and lots of use here. And I just use some baking paper and lay that over the top. There's enough greasing inside the baking paper, but as I said, the mixture is so moist with butter, you really don't need anything else. So all we do is just lay the paper over the top. And what we can also do at the moment is turn our oven on. Now these cook at a fairly low temperature, so I'm going to turn it on to 145 degrees, and I'm going to set it on fan bake. So that's going to start making a bit of noise in a minute with the fan, but we get that nice and hot ready for our biscuits. Okay, so the next step, I've just boiled some water as well, and we're going to add the bicarb soda to some boiled water, or boiled water to the bicarb soda actually, and then we're going to add that to our butter and golden syrup. We can turn this heat off. So what we're going to do is mix these two together. Now when we add the mixture of the water and bicarb to our golden syrup and butter, you can see that this forms our raising agent. So what will end up happening is this frothing action. This is the carbon dioxide being produced, and this is going to give our biscuits some leavening. Back over to our bowl. We add all of that mixture in together. Make sure you get all of that golden syrup and butter out of your saucepan. And then mix to a nice dough. It's more of a batter than a dough. It will be a little stiff, but that won't take long for that butter to melt right through those dry ingredients, and you'll end up with something that you can work with. Make sure you get right down to the end of that bowl, because it's very, very easy to miss some of that flour, and if you don't mix it thoroughly in with the butter and the golden syrup, you'll end up with dry bits throughout your biscuit, which will really spoil not only the texture but the flavour as well. If it's a little bit too moist for you, you can pop it into the fridge and you can leave it there for about 30 minutes. Or if it looks okay, which this one does from my perspective, I don't mind actually getting my hands into it. The next step is to just roll it into little balls. So let me just move my bowl over this way and bring my tray over so you can see what I'm doing here. Grasp it together in your hands, roll it into little balls, and just place the balls on your tray. Now the way I tend to do it is giving them a little bit of space apart, because they will spread, and if they spread too much they're going to join up with each other and you're going to have to cut them. Now that does tend to happen with mine most of the time, and I don't really mind that. But if you make them small enough, they'll just become perfectly round biscuits. Personally, I quite like that unevenness of them. So I usually give them about 3 or 4 centimetres apart, or about 2 inches if you're doing the imperial measurements. And I tend to make them staggered like this on my tray. The reason I do that is because it does just give them that little bit more room to move when they're cooking. You should get about 12 biscuits out of one quantity. I do tend to make 2 or 3 quantities at a time because I distribute them amongst the family when I do them, so I do a large batch. Okay, so I tell a lie, we've got 15 there. Obviously I made my last batch a lot bigger than these. All right, so they're ready to go. Now, what I do tend to do is put a fork on the top of them and flatten them out. So if you just take a fork and flatten them out just a little bit, you'll also get a little bit of a tine pattern across the top. And then into the oven for about 15 minutes. I usually set my timer. That way if I go away and have a cup of tea, I'm not going to forget about my biscuits. Okay, our biscuits are done, so let's have a look at them. Now, one of the things that's important to remember when you make these biscuits is the length of time you cook them for will determine how chewy they are, apart from just having the golden syrup in them. Now, this is the sort of colour that I like. If they get any darker than this, they're going to be crispy. But if they stay this colour, then they're going to be nice and chewy, which is the way that I particularly like them. The first thing you've got to do when you take them out of the oven is you've got to make sure that you leave them on the tray for a good 10 minutes before you remove them. If you try to remove them now, they're actually quite soft, as you can see, but they will firm up as they cool down, and that's when you can remove them, but they'll still be nice and chewy. So if I wanted these to be crispier, I could do two things. One is I could toast my oats, and that will help that. Secondly, I could put, oh, three things actually. Secondly, I can not put as much golden syrup in them, which will help to also make them a little bit more firm. And thirdly, I could cook them for a bit longer than that 15 minutes, so probably 20 minutes would be more than enough to get them a little bit crispier. The other nice thing about these biscuits, I find, is that if they are crispy, you can actually break them up afterwards, even put them into a blender or a food processor, and they make a really lovely muesli. So you can add some fruit to it, some nuts and things like that, and it's a gorgeous muesli because you've already done it all with this toasting. It's really quite lovely. All right, so we're going to leave them for just a few minutes to let them cool down, and I'm going to go and make a cup of tea so I can have a nice hot biscuit with it. I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, so time is up, and now you'll find they're very, very easy to lift off. Just take them all and pop them onto a cake rack so that they can cool. But of course, waiting for them to do that isn't going to be an easy task. So I've already made my cup of tea and I'm pretty much ready to already dig in. The dilemma with Anzac biscuits is that they are so delicious that it's pretty hard to stop at one. So all that's left now, look how chewy that is. Look how beautiful that just falls apart. Seriously good. Seriously good. And with a good cup of Bushells tea from Australia. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you haven't attempted Anzac biscuits yet, I suggest you give them a go. They are just delicious. And people will love you for them. See you next time.